Up next, we're going to have a TED Talk from Naveen Rao, who leads MSD for Mothers, which those of you in the US might also know as Merck for Mothers. And they're really looking at what is their role in helping address some of the critical maternal child health problems. And in doing that, they have, they're both being very introspective, but they're also experimenting. They're part of a development impact bond that was announced last year that's tackling maternal health in Rajasthan, India. And so Naveen, who, as some of you might know, is actually headed to the Rockefeller Foundation in a few weeks. So this is, we're grateful that he can join us at the end of his time at MSD for Mothers and really share some of his insights with us about what's holding back some of these new models, what can be done, and how the private sector can be engaged. So please join me in welcoming Naveen Rao to the stage.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's been a long day, I can see. My name is Naveen Rao. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank Devex and all the partners to be here. It looks like it's a pretty full room. Let me tell you what I am not. So we set the stage. I am not a financial expert. In fact, I have no finance degrees, and I don't even know what my investments are doing right now. But I am a physician. I'm a medical physician by training. I'm in the corporate social responsibility space, but I also am a businessman. I ran parts of the company when I'm still with Merck. So I want to bring that lens, and I think what you heard today from the panelists was absolutely some of the key themes. I was sitting back there listening, but the key themes that I heard that are the same words that we hear, and I'd like to amplify and talk a bit about them from a personal experience that I've had in actually putting a public-private development impact bond in the market. So I want to talk to you from that experience, but it's all about the innovation. How do you align the measurements? How do you make sure the partners all come to the table and have aligned priorities? So all the themes you heard from the panelists are absolutely appropriate. In fact, you might be feeling that I'll be repeating quite a few of those, but I'm going to try to bring it through a personal lens and through an experience that I've had in putting together a bond. So I represent Merck for Mothers. I've had the honor to lead it for the last 7 years. I am now on the verge of handing it over to my colleague, Marianne, who's sitting here. And then stepping out, I will be joining Rockefeller Foundation, taking care of the health at that side. So while I'm not stepping too far, at least right now I have the public-private experience to give you that kind of set. The first most important thing is to have a really very, very clear goal, and that's so important. And for us, it's very clear that maternal mortality is preventable, it's unacceptable, and it's claiming something like 830 lives a day. When you have that kind of tragedy happening for no other reason than, in the famous words of Dr. Fatala, we know why they're dying and we know how to save them. The only reason they're dying is because we have to decide they're worth saving. I mean, I heard a few sighs, but it comes down to that we let our mothers die because we have yet to decide they're worth saving. So it's that kind of North Star, that kind of polarizing, unifying principle that you need to be able to do any kind of innovative financing. At the end of the day, the innovative financing, remember, is just a means. Quite often we get so caught up in putting that vehicle together that becomes the end. But you have to realize that innovative financing is just a means, and you have to remember what the ends are. And if you have bumps in the road, and you will have bumps in the road, you do need a North Star to remind all the partners who've come to the table with vested interests why we are working together. And so with this in mind, let me ask you a question here in the audience, a show of hands. How many of you in this audience have personally know somebody, either your mother, your sister, or your daughter, who died during pregnancy or childbirth? Anybody here have a mother, sister, or daughter die during childbirth? One? Okay. I'm sorry, sir, but just to put it in perspective, I was in a similar room, maybe not as many, in Uganda, with a group of women sitting there, and I asked the same question, and every one of them raised their hand. And this was 3 years ago. So why is there such a disparity? Why has it become a birth lottery that we were born on this side and one hand has gone up, and if we were born on that side, every hand goes up? Is there a way to get to these problems beyond just abdicating it to, say, governments, to say that this is a social public health problem and hence the government is responsible? And then we look towards donors to say, how can we have donors to come in and help us solve the situation? And then we keep our fingers crossed and we hope for some of the private sector to come in. There's something wrong. It's not working. It's absolutely not working. 800 women die every day. That's about twice the number of people in this room every day. And yet, we continue to wonder, what can we do better to change, to make it better within our own shops? But unless we come together and unless we really do believe that blended financing, where we are now talking about combining the private sector, the public sector, and within those sectors, how can we do the non-commercial and commercial? At the end of the day, if we don't blend donor aid and private sector aid and government aid, we're not going to get to the problem. And by the way, throwing money at the problem is not enough. And I will talk to you about what happened during the journey we did when we put the bond together. But one statistic that I'd like to leave with you here is that the private sector funds far outperform, the scale of the private sector funding in this space is much bigger than the donor space and the government space and the aid space and the bilateral space. The private sector space is much bigger. We need to get the private sector to come in. And we need to be also understand that if you really look at it, the private sector would like to come in, but they have their own set of problems and they don't understand how to come in or why to come in. But they do want to come in. I'll give you a recent example, and this is wearing my private sector hat from a private corporate, for-profit corporate that I work for. There was recently a memo that was put out by BlackRock, the investment group BlackRock, that basically said to all their lead investors and said to all the companies that our investors are now going to ask you companies specific question on what they call ESG, which is environment, sustainability, and governance. It's not enough that you show us high profits. We want to know what is your footprint on the environment, or what is your sustainability plan, and what kind of governance do you have? So there is a move from private sector to look beyond just profits and return on investment. But you have to understand, they speak that language. And as long as we on this side, on the development side, don't speak that language, but yet we hope they come in droves, and we don't know how to engage with them, it's not enough that we clean our own house. We need to find how do we excite, how do we get that private sector to come in and want to be part of this journey? And they want to be part of this journey, but they don't know how to engage. And so it's up to us to understand, how do we then work with governments who can then work with industries to level the playing field to make it attractive for these private sectors to come in? So it is all, right now I'm talking in generalities, but let me just take it to the bond that we put together. It was the Utkrish Development Bond. We started this journey, we just launched the bond at Davos this year in January, and we started it 2 years ago, the conversations. The whole idea was, could we put a development impact bond in the state of Rajasthan? First, the concept was, could we do a development impact bond for a couple of years and then hand it over to the government of Rajasthan in India to make it a social impact bond, and so that there would be sustainability. So we first started talking to the government of India saying, if we come in with a group of funders, would you be interested? So then park the fact that they had their own interests. So now you have a government of India that is first. I remember when I first went, the first question they came and asked me is, so what is in it for us? How much money are you going to give us? Because this was his analogy, the State Minister of Health there, that I have built a stadium, this is how he's seeing it. It's my football stadium. You are going to bring a team and play football. You're going to put your banner up there saying, you people did all this. So what are you going to pay me for your banners out there? That was how far we were apart. And we had to convince him that we were coming in to save the mothers, and that was why we wanted to do this and not for the banners. And that, by the way, these were his sisters and daughters, and this was his constituency. And so it started with that. It took us 2 years. Then we needed to find a group of investors who would believe in this. It's not easy. There are social investors. There's trillions of dollars that if you read that is available. And they are coming in droves. In fact, in that blended finance slide, I forgot to tell you, in the last 2 years, there have been something like 160 blended finance instruments dealing with about $80 billion. If you go back 10 years ago, there was not one. So the scale, and it's increasing. But how do you go find these social investors that you know are out there? So we worked with a group, Palladium Group, that then started to go around and talk to this investor group. And we found in Switzerland, the UBS Optimus Foundation had a group of investors that were willing to talk to us. They said, we still want a return on investment. This is not philanthropy. But 2 things they said to us. That we'll take a slightly less return on our investment, but we want to make sure that there is a return because this is not philanthropy. And second, they said is, whatever we make and if this whole thing is paid back to us, and I'll come to how the outcome funders pay back, then we will plow that money back into another project. So we did find the right kind of investors, but they didn't come in saying, okay, it's okay if you invest our money and we lose it. They wanted a return investment. Then we needed to find the implementing partners who would agree to all this in country, who would do these programs for the maternal, to reduce maternal mortality. And for us, it was all about reducing preventable maternal mortality. But then how do we get these implementing partners to agree to the measurements and to this whole process? Because while they would be paid, they understood that they were going to be held to a high degree of M&E measurement and that they probably were not used to, and they needed to be able to deliver on the bottom line at the end of the day. Then we stepped in as a private sector saying we'll be the outcome funder. And then USAID joined us. So you can imagine. We had USAID and Merck for Mothers were going to be the outcome funders who would pay back the investors in Switzerland, provided the endpoints were met. And we had an independent evaluator who was going to tell us whether we met those. Then, what are those indicators? So from us, Merck for Mothers, we wanted quality indicators. We wanted to make sure that the women were receiving quality care in the facilities that we were funding. Clearly, the investors wanted a different set of indicators so that they would have assurance that they would get their money back. We wanted to have really high standards. The investors wanted to make sure they got their money back, so the standards were approachable and were lead indicators. So it took us 2 years. I have done a lot of deals. I've done a lot of negotiation. This one was the hardest I've ever done. 2 years, and let me just put one thing in perspective. We had 6 sets of lawyers and 20 contracts. So if you think it's easy, I think you should just go some other room and listen to some other talk. This is not easy. By the way, I haven't come to dissuade you. I've come to encourage you to think and do this. But I also feel, hand on heart, I need to tell you, this is really difficult. So I learned 3 lessons here. The first lesson I learned was you need to have the right people at the table. First, you have to have the right people. You have to have the right people at the table. We had people that wanted to come in, that we weren't sure why they were coming in, and we wanted people who never came in. So it's really important right at the beginning to have the right people. And then I go back to what I said about the North Star. It's really important to have a unifying North Star that you're all working towards. While the investors wanted their money back, we wanted certain indicators, USAID wanted certain indicators. So we needed to come to some meeting of the minds, and these are people who we don't work together, we're normally not together, but we decided this journey. And I must tell you, each one of us wanted to leave this partnership, threw up our hands and said we had enough. All of us. But 2 years into it, we launched it in January, and I must tell you, it is one of the most hardest but the most satisfying things we have done at Merck for Mothers. So there is a payoff, but it's not easy. The second point is expect the unexpected. We had all kinds of things come at us, including the election in the US, with the whole change in perspective of what USAID would or would not do, and what the new administration here felt about aid and what was happening abroad. In Rajasthan, there was a political upheaval, there was an election, there was a change, so we had to go back and talk to people again. And so absolutely expect the unexpected, but even some good things happened when we least expected it. Things started clicking and working. And so the last one is the importance to stay the course, that it's not easy. But at the end of the day, if you really believe why you're doing this, and in our case, it was the mother, and very easy to say, I was going to ask a question, do you think our moms are worth it? But I guess the answer is up there. But truly, I wish you all the best. Enter into these discussions with your mind open and heart open, but understand that unless you invite the private sector in, and unless you really have unifying goals that you can all pull towards, it's not easy. But if you can do it, it's really satisfying. So thank you for the opportunity.